There are times where your intuition tells you to worry about someone and you need to listen to it. And then there's times where your intuition says, it's nothing. Don't listen to that intuition. It's something until proven otherwise.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
Tell the audience a little bit about you professionally, what you do, and what's your background.
Awesome. Well, I am a clinical nurse educator for emergency nursing and critical care. And I came about that path after in nursing school feeling a strong calling to be a flight nurse. And interestingly enough, I've never been a flight nurse, but it set me on a trajectory to make a great foundation for flight nursing. And so I was told by a mentor, to be a great flight nurse, you need pre-hospital experience, which I was already getting. I was an EMT basic in nursing school. And I was encouraged to get at least 3 years in critical care, at least 1 year in the ER, mix it with that pre-hospital experience, and that would be a great foundation. So when I graduated nursing school, it was a nurse-saturated market, and I said I would take the first critical care job I could get. And I took one, and it was wonderful. And I spent the next 10 years in critical care. And I was super stoked to manage the patient at the cellular level. My specialty was trauma, and I loved it. I promised myself at the same time I would never work a day burnt out. And in critical care, I got to see lots of burnt out nurses and burnt out providers, and I promised I would never do it. And so when I felt a little hint of getting burnt out, I decided that I was going to go do that emergency department. It was on my bucket list, and I needed to do it. And what I didn't know then, but what I know now, is I'm absolutely an ER nurse through and through. Always have been, probably always will be.
Yep.
I got bit by a bug pretty quickly.
Nice.
So after about 3 weeks in the ER, I realized I didn't have to be in the biggest and the baggedest tertiary care center doing trauma care, that any ER is a place where you can make a real great connection with people. So after about a year at the bedside in the ER, I was asked to be an educator, and I've never looked back. So where I have not chosen to fly, I've chosen to deepen the practice of emergency nursing, and now, again, critical care has come full circle, and I come to work to break down barriers so nurses can take care of patients and do a remarkable job.
That's awesome. That's very cool.
Yep.
What's something your coworkers might not know about you that you could share?
Let's see. I'm pretty transparent, and I wear a lot of myself on the outside. And because I'm a relational educator, I choose to teach like I would hope that we take care of the people in our care. I use a lot of stories, and I am pretty transparent. I think it might surprise a lot of my coworkers that I've always participated in some type of youth activities. I was an at-risk kid through and through. I shouldn't, by statistics, be where I am at in life, but I had some pretty awesome adults pour into my life at a young age, and I was able to get some things turned around. And I knew in college, as soon as I graduated, it was my turn to give back. And so for the most part, my entire adult life, I've done some form of youth ministry.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's very cool. It's funny that how some adults come through our life and touch our lives when they may not even realize they're doing it, and put you on a path. It's crazy.
For sure, and some were very intentional about it, and some just allowed me to live life with them and to see a different type of influence. Some of them helped me to see the good in my situation, so it wasn't all gloom and doom. They were able to see where I was getting stronger because of some of the challenges that my family faced, and I'm forever thankful.
How did you get started in nursing?
I literally woke up one day in 10th grade after a period of time of wondering what I would be and knowing I love science and I love photography, and I love to teach, but I wasn't very academic myself. I woke up one day in high school, and I felt a sincere calling from God to be a nurse. I never heard a voice.
Really?
I just woke up, and there was no question about what I was supposed to do, and I've literally never looked back.
Interesting.
Yeah, that day I didn't know what to do with that calling, and so I went to the only nurse I knew, who was the school nurse, And I sat in her office and I explained to her that I was called to be a nurse. And I sat there a little bit longer. She said, "You do know you need to finish school, though, right?"
You're like,
So she sent me back to class.
you're like, let's get through high school first, okay? That's
Exactly.
awesome. At what point in your career were you like, oh my God, this is totally right. This is exactly what I was supposed to be doing?
Potentially every day I go to work, and that's no lie. Nursing school was difficult. It's probably one of the most challenging things I've ever done, but I knew the whole time that I was there for a reason and a purpose, and I never doubted it. I think a time where I thought maybe of stepping away from true nursing, and I realized I couldn't do it, was just another confirmation to me. But I always loved nursing, and I loved bedside nursing, and I literally felt like every day of my life was a movie, and I was telling a story. But when it came time to go to grad school, I thought for a moment about seeking my master's degree in emergency preparedness.
Huh.
But something about that didn't seem quite right. And I really felt a strong pull to get my master's of science in nursing.
Nice.
And I think that was just a confirmation to me that nursing is where I belong, and I am a nurse. Not that I couldn't be successful in emergency preparedness. It's one of my favorite subspecialties within emergency nursing. It just wasn't for me to get my master's in. So,
Gotcha.
but I would say that every day I come to be a nurse. Every day I put on what I call my super suit, my scrubs, my lab coat, whatever it might be. It's the right day for me to be a nurse.
That's awesome. Tell me about your transition from the bedside to the education.
Yeah, for me, I'm kind of lucky in that it was a slow fade. When I was asked to be the educator, there was still a lot of needs operationally for that unit. And so in many ways, I was asked to be an educator, but I was put in more of an assistant manager position. And I still got to support the unit operationally with assignments from time to time, certainly for critical patients or times of surge. But I couldn't develop the classroom. I couldn't get to where I need to be and to leverage the other part of my role by being in operations. And so we realized over time that I needed to devote more time to being an educator and a consultant, and not as much of a actual bedside nurse that took part of the staffing burden. And so the staffing burden was relieved from me, and it helped me to develop others. And again, I used to go to work to break down barriers for patients so they could get better or pass with dignity. Then it became a breaking down barriers for other people. And that might have been by developing their knowledge. It might have been in policy development, procedural development, or just trying to see what the evidence-based practice was out there. When I first became an educator in emergency nursing, I didn't have a lot of bedside time in ER. And so I chose to get deeply involved in the Emergency Nurses Association. I used that to leverage other units and other professionals and other colleagues, because I was in a community emergency department with not a lot of ER time, and I needed to be able to know what I needed to know to give them the gift that I could give them as an educator. And so the ENA was hugely fundamental in developing as an ER educator. And it really helped with that transition away from the bedside as well, because I had mentors and I had people that had gone before me, and they knew stuff. I never asked someone something they were surprised by, because they had been there.
Now, when you were a new educator, and you said you were fairly not maybe as seasoned as others who were educators before you, did you get any pushback from the staff at being so young and so new and being the educator?
For sure. And I chose really early on in this transition to take that with humility and to ask the staff to partner with me, and that we were on a journey together, and that I might have the name educator, but they might have the name expert. And it was an opportunity for me to celebrate people who knew more and had a lot to teach me. And I still do it today. Anytime I need a new team member, I recognize that they're an expert in something that I'm not. It may not be nursing. It may be nursing. It might be life, or it might be a certain subpopulation or subculture. But I just decided to approach it with humility and realize that I had something to offer, but that there are people around me that certainly could run circles around me in various ways, and it's been a win-win.
Nice. As an educator, what currently has your attention? Like, what kind of things are you thinking about right now in nursing?
That's a great question. This has been an exciting last year. A year ago this week, I was asked to take on critical care again for my organization and have a dual role. I'm the clinical nurse educator for emergency services and critical care for 2 facilities.
Wow.
And I think it's making me realize that we have opportunities in emergency nursing to dig deeper. I've often said emergency nurses are jack of all trades, masters of some.
Yeah.
And I think we have opportunities to subspecialize in emergency nursing and to dig deeper and not to shy away from some of the things that are considered the hard things. They're not necessarily hard things. They might be low volume things. So the deepening or the elevating, either way you want to talk about it, of nursing practice in the emergency department has my attention. Taking the ER nurse to the next level, whether that might be understanding the pathophysiology and the why behind the tasks, or looking at what we've always done and considering looking at other specialties that do it all the time and what we can glean from them and really develop emergency nursing. Emergency nursing as a specialty is not really that old. There's been OR nurses long before there were ER nurses. There's been med-surg nurses and even critical care nurses long before there were ER nurses. And ER nursing is still, in so many ways, in its young adulthood.
Yeah.
So I think we have some opportunities there.
That's cool. What's some of the best advice you were ever given by a mentor?
Not to take myself too seriously. I think that's a big one, and I keep coming back to it. I actually have a quote from a mentor. I wish I was at work. I could read it to you, but the gist of it is, from someone who takes herself too seriously at times, I was encouraged to not take myself too seriously. I tend to put a lot of pressure on myself, and I have a lot of expectations that I put upon myself, and sometimes it creates barriers in my own work. It might make me spend too much time on one portion of a project and not get to where I need to go. And so I think not to take myself too seriously and to be willing to move forward in the face of uncertainty and see where it leads me. And those have been some really powerful things for me. Yeah.
Tell me about a mistake you made as an educator. Tell me, just give me a little bit about the details and then how you handled it and what you would do differently if you had to do it again.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing that always comes back to me is when I first became an educator, I hadn't gone to school to be an educator. I came to my master's in nursing education after I took the position. And every day I went to school, I could immediately apply what I was using, maybe with the exception of statistics or ethics. I didn't have an ethical dilemma or a need for statistics every day, but almost everything else I could apply nearly immediately. But something I wish someone had told me early on as an educator is, do not call someone out on some mistake in front of their peers. And I did that, and it was specifically to the matriarch of the unit who had made a pretty significant lapse in restraint documentation. And I was asked to bring it to her attention and to work through it. It was a chart correction that needed to happen, and it was time sensitive, as you only have so long to correct a chart. And I did it in front of her peers, and it wasn't received well by her, and I knew immediately that I had made a mistake, and so did everybody else. And I needed to do some service recovery with that team member. I went personally to each person that witnessed that and shared with them my need to grow and the lesson that I had learned. And I absolutely would have done it differently. I would have put her aside. We would have talked about it. We would have learned from each other, and it would have prevented some difficult conversations that happened afterwards for me. I will say, though, in that service recovery, and my face-to-face apologies with the other team members, I gained some deep relationships, and they became some of the most important cheerleaders for me over the next months and years in my role. And that matriarch of the department is still the matriarch of the department, and she is the restraint documentation expert. And I think a big part of that was her desire to want to do the right thing. And I believe that time that she had a lapse in her documentation, it's because she did not know. There's no one that does it better now, not because of me, maybe in spite of me.
For you, what's the most difficult part of being an educator?
Well, I'm still trying to triumph the whole 24 hours in a day thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work for the educator because there's always something that needs to be done now. There's always something that needs to be developed for the future, and there's always something unknown to us that's being asked of us. And, unlike my time in the bedside, when I gave report, I got to step away.
Yep.
I can't step away, and I always have deliverables that seem to not be done.
Yeah.
It's exceptionally rewarding when I finish a project, or even just a deliverable. Maybe it's an assignment, maybe it's a presentation I was asked to do. But I need to conquer the time in the day and be able to balance work and life. I laugh every time I teach a new team member how to sign off their time and attendance every 2 weeks. And I show them my time and staffing. And I have 2 rows. It's 40 hours this week and 40 hours the second week. And it doesn't matter how many hours I work that week. And I average between 50 and 60 hours a week. But that's not fair to a lot of people, right? And so, yeah, my family, the 4 teenagers that call me mom. So actually, I can't say I average 50 to 60 hours a week. I average 50 hours a week. The 60 is still the exception. So to me, my biggest challenge as an educator is finding the time to meet all the needs. I hear from the staff a lot, oh, we never see you anymore. And I hear from the leaders, oh, we never see you anymore. And I hear from the new employees, we don't see you that much. And I'm seeing all those people, but not to the extent that satisfies them.
Yeah.
And so I struggle with, the many hats an educator wears and that ability to be the just-in-time consultant versus the person who's planning a curriculum for the entire next year to develop a residency group. And then, the people who need you to weigh in on policy, procedure, and operations.
Is there a particular software or tech gadget that you found helpful in your role as an educator?
Yeah, I'm kind of psyched about Zoom. We have recently abandoned Skype as an organization, and we're using Zoom, and I really like it. I just found out that I have the ability to annotate on the screen in a meeting. I love the quality of the product. It allows me to work with educators across my entire corporation, even though they're 8 hours away. And I'm kind of psyched about Zoom, and that might not be that exciting to some people, but for me, it's given me the ability to allow people, again, who are hours and hours away to participate in a class that they might have not been able to otherwise.
That's awesome.
So that's something that comes to mind.
What resources do you find yourself recommending to new ER nurses?
I'm looking for more, and I was asked to spend some time educating our ER nurses about pediatric patient care, pediatric patient communication, and parental communication. How do we leverage resources with our peds population? We're a combined community ER, and so we have people that haven't traditionally taken care of kids that come into our nursing practice and don't know how to talk to parents. Maybe they haven't been a parent or had a kid themselves. And so in that class, one of the things I realized that ER nurses don't necessarily understand congenital heart defects. And so we might get a kid that, had topology of Fallot or an atrial septal defect at birth, maybe repaired, maybe unrepaired, and we might not understand what that was, what it is now, what that repair, constitutes for that child. So one of the things I've asked them to do is to not memorize them, but to use resources that are out there to help people learn about these populations, these kids with these these things are adults even, an adult congenital heart disorder patient. So one of the apps that I love is Heartpedia, and it comes out of Cincinnati Children's, and it's a really well done visual app. It shows the defect of the heart. It shows what a normal heart looks like, and then it shows what the repair of the defect usually looks like. And then in very easy to read English, because the app was developed for clinicians to use with parents to explain these things shortly after birth. It explains all of those aspects, what the defect is, how it came to be, what the repair entails, what, the potential outcomes are. And so I asked the ER nurses, don't memorize it, but be willing to look it up and be willing to talk to the parents who become the experts.
Absolutely.
And to learn about the impact it has, on the child or the young adult or the adult. And so I've enjoyed that. That was a pearl that one of the women's and children's educators shared with me, and kind of loved it. I'm mind blown by it. I wish I knew more about it myself. So hopefully I did it justice if the developers are listening.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So one of the last questions I'm always going to ask is a question called 3 things. So I'm going to ask you to give an ER nurse 3 things to always remember.
Oh, what a great exercise.
And then the next part's going to be 3 things to forget.
Okay. I think 3 things to remember. The first thing to come to mind is life is precious. Life is precious at the beginning, it's precious at the middle, and it's precious at the end. And so just remember, every life is precious. I wish every ER nurse would remember to use their resources, and that we can harm more people by trying to memorize something and not being willing to use a resource in the moment than we could, ever imagine if we just used the resource to begin with, and to not be too proud to have that resource available. And then the third thing I would ask is to trust your gut. And I know people say that a lot, and they talk about intuition, and I believe intuition can be a double-edged sword. There are times where your intuition tells you to worry about someone, and you need to listen to it. And then there's times where your intuition says, it's nothing. Don't listen to that intuition. It's something until proven otherwise.
Yep.
It's something until proven otherwise. And that goes similarly with listening to the parent's impression. If someone who knows this person is concerned, you were to be concerned until proven otherwise. So those are my 3 things to keep. Something to let go of. Let me think about that. Well, I think a lot of ER nurses are willing to let go of perfection. I think that's the beauty of the ER. We're allowed to be a little bit messier. We have a reputation about not having the most perfect charting and not the most perfect lines. And I think that's important, because in the desire to be perfect and to have everything in order, we might miss something pretty big.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, and that might be more of a personal struggle than a universal struggle. I'd like all ER nurses to leave any kind of contention with pre-hospital providers at the door, not bring it to work, to respect the care of the pre-hospital provider. And so if there's a chip on your shoulder about our pre-hospital providers or our EMS, that chip can't come with you to work. That's not a bridge that can be burned. It hurts patients and it hurts professionals. So that's something I wish that ER nurses would leave behind. And lastly, and I think it's happening, the concept of eating young. I am happy to grow up in a time in nursing where I know what that was like, and I do believe we are changing that culture, and I get to see it, and I get to cheerlead those who are not willing to carry on that culture in nursing, and I've seen that changing. So for those of you who are still out there that are willing to eat your young, you need to toss that behavior right now. We can only build up. We have no time to tear down. Again, it hurts patients and it hurts professionals, and it needs to be left behind.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's all my questions.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to answer them.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so glad to have you here and answering these questions. And thanks for letting me go through these with you. And they're still kind of a work in progress. And I appreciate you taking. I just want to give you a big hug. You're like the sweetest person ever.
I don't know about that.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.